Have you ever walked into a dealership and felt your wallet flinch before you even see the bike? For years, a real American Tourer meant $25,000, maybe 30 grand, the kind of price that made freedom feel like a finance plan. But this year, one tag stopped riders cold. $13,000. Brand new, American-built, wearing an Indian badge. The 2025 Indian Scout Classic starts at $13,499. The Harley Road Glide, $26,999. On a 5-year note at 5.5%, that's about $255 a month versus $500. For guys like us, that difference isn't pocket change. That's gas money, tires, maybe a few weekends of real freedom. So tonight we're breaking down how Indian pulled this off, why Harley didn't stop it, and what it means for the bike sitting in your own garage. The $13,000 earthquake. No one expected it. On a gray Tuesday morning, the industry woke up to a number that didn't make sense. $13,000. That was all Indian Motorcycles was asking for a full-size touring machine. Not a stripped-down commuter, not an entry-level cruiser, but a genuine American bagger with the stance and heart to run side by side with Harley's Road Glide. For decades, the Road Glide had sat comfortably on its throne, defended by chrome, history, and a loyal crowd who swore there was nothing better on the highway. But in one announcement, Indian threw a wrench straight through that story. The press release hit like a thunderclap. Dealers scrambled, forums exploded. Disbelief mixed with curiosity. No way it's real, some said. If it rides half as good as the Challenger, Harley's in trouble, others replied. Indian hadn't just slashed a price, they'd redefined value in heavyweight touring. That $13,000 tag became rebellion incarnate, a strike against complacency. For too long, Harley charged for heritage. Indian delivered torque, comfort, and steel for less than nostalgia. Every loyalist felt it like a gut punch. The moment pride met its first real challenger. Yet even amid the shock, one question lingered. How did Indian pull it off? Anatomy of a perfect ambush. Nothing about Indian's move was accidental. It was a calculated strike, patient, methodical, and aimed right at Milwaukee's softest spot. Industry insiders later revealed that Indian had spent over 2 years studying Harley's supply chain, learning where costs inflated and where inefficiency had crept in. They noticed Harley's over-reliance on domestic suppliers charging premium rates, while Indian quietly built partnerships with global vendors who could deliver the same quality without the markup. The secret wasn't cheap parts, it was smart logistics. Indian optimized manufacturing through shared components, streamlined assembly and bulk material sourcing under the Polaris umbrella. Every nut, bolt, and panel served a purpose. The design philosophy was brutal in its simplicity. Build a bike that felt premium but priced like rebellion. Behind closed doors, engineers called it the Ghost Project because it would appear from nowhere and haunt Harley's profit sheets. The timing was surgical. As Harley celebrated its quarterly rebound, Indian dropped a shocker. A new American bagger priced at nearly half a Road Glide special. Media pivoted instantly, headlines flipping from profit to panic. It was a Cold War-style ambush, leaks, reveals, and chaos by design. Yet the real punch wasn't price, but confidence. Indian never called it cheap, they called it smart. Power, comfort, integrity. The very virtues Harley once owned now carried a different badge. Still, every strike lands hardest when the opponent's guard is down. And Harley's guard had been down for years. That blind spot, forged by decades of dominance, would become the company's undoing. If you've ever felt that brands stopped listening to real riders, hit that like button and drop a comment. I want to hear what you think Harley should do next. When legacy gets comfortable. For a long time, Harley-Davidson believed loyalty was unshakable. The orange and black shield wasn't just a logo, it was a religion. Riders wore it on jackets, helmets, and even their skin. Harley's executives took that devotion as armor, proof that no one could touch them. But the truth is, comfort dulls the blade. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, Harley leaned on tradition instead of innovation. Prices crept up, features lagged behind, and every new model was wrapped in the same sales pitch. Heritage. They assumed that riders would pay premium money for the feeling of the open road, even if the bikes themselves weren't evolving fast enough to justify it. Meanwhile, Indian watched, learned, and waited. Inside Harley dealerships, frustration simmered. Younger riders were priced out, older ones tired of paying more for less. Mechanics grumbled about misplaced chrome and useless electronics. Leadership missed the warning signs. Then Indian's $13,000 bombshell hit, blindsiding Milwaukee. While Harley polished nostalgia ads, Indian built for the modern road warrior. The echo was deafening across boardrooms and showrooms alike. History alone no longer sells motorcycles. The road rewards relevance, not memory, and Harley had forgotten that rule. And yet, this story isn't just about corporations or competition, it's about the people who ride, wrench, and live these machines. Because the moment that price hit the air, the riders themselves became the voice of truth. If you're thinking about your own ride, check the description. We've listed the gear, accessories, and tools real riders trust on the road. The noise from the streets. At first, the conversation sounded like disbelief. By the end of the week, it turned into a roar. Riders everywhere were talking, not just online, but at gas stations, garage meets, and bike nights. The words 13,000 came up again and again, spoken with half a laugh and half a dare. Even Harley loyalists leaned in to listen. Test ride videos started appearing within days. The new Indian rolled out of lots smoother than skeptics expected. Reviewers described it as balanced, muscular, and shockingly refined for its class. Riders compared throttle response, lean angle, and wind protection to the Road Glide, and the difference wasn't embarrassing for Indian. In fact, it was inspiring. A few admitted grudgingly that it felt more stable in crosswinds. Others said the suspension handled better on rough pavement. Dealers felt the shift overnight. Calls doubled, wait list grew, and Harley shops slashed prices to keep doors open. The bagger world, once Harley's kingdom, now had a rival riders could actually afford. In garages nationwide, 30-year loyalties cracked as men whispered the unthinkable. Maybe it's time to ride what works, not what's expected. That murmur spread like wildfire. This wasn't just a launch, it was the start of a full-blown war for America's most sacred territory, the rider's trust. What came next wasn't just about specs or prices. It was about how Indian built this machine and why its design dared to strip ego out of engineering itself. Engineering without ego. When riders first threw a leg over Indian's new $13,000 machine, they expected compromise. What they found instead was craftsmanship. The frame was a rigid backbone of cast aluminum, lighter and stiffer than the traditional steel skeleton most baggers still relied on. It carved through corners instead of wobbling through them. The suspension setup came straight from years of racing refinement, a dual bending valve front fork and a tuned monoshock rear that soaked up broken asphalt without complaint. This wasn't a discount build. It was precision without vanity. The engine told the same story. A power plant of solid muscle, 108 cubic inches of liquid-cooled confidence, delivering torque numbers that embarrassed bikes costing twice as much. Riders described it as steady, almost locomotive in its pull, with a broad torque band that made downshifting optional. It didn't shout, it surged. Every gear felt like a handshake between old-school grunt and modern engineering. What set it apart wasn't specs, but restraint. Indian's engineers skipped gimmicks and tuned for feel, real throttle response, balanced comfort, and no hidden tech traps. It was pure mechanics, alive yet refined. Harley's Road Glide had long ruled highway stability, but that crown began to slip. The new Indian matched its manners, equaled its comfort, and outperformed it in agility, all at a fraction of the cost. Simplicity, not excess, had finally rewritten the touring hierarchy. That mechanical integrity didn't happen by chance. It was the result of a manufacturing strategy that redefined how an American motorcycle could be built from the ground up. The supply chain equation. Every revolution starts with math. For Indian, the secret wasn't in cheaper parts, it was in smarter partnerships. Under Polaris's wing, Indian had access to a supply chain designed for efficiency, not nostalgia. Instead of relying solely on small-batch domestic suppliers who charged heritage premiums, Indian integrated modern production models, shared logistics, cross-industry materials, and regional plants that minimized freight costs. Each bolt, bracket, and bearing was tracked with ruthless precision. This system meant fewer middlemen and faster assembly. Paint, wiring harnesses, and castings came from vetted vendors with proven track records in motorsports manufacturing. Even small choices, like switching to modular harness designs or using common fasteners across models, cut costs without hurting performance. It wasn't flashy, it was disciplined. While Harley's lines carried tradition's weight, Indians were built for agility. Retooling came fast, production shifts seamless, and by launch, every dollar was optimized. The mission was bold: craft a heavyweight machine at a mid-weight price without losing American roots. And they pulled it off. No offshore shortcuts, no hollow badges. Major castings and final assembly stayed in Spirit Lake, Iowa. It was proof that efficiency and identity could coexist. A silent revolution powered by pride, not outsourcing. But this efficiency didn't just impress accountants, it shocked the people on the front lines, the salesmen who suddenly had to rewrite their entire pitch book. Salesmen with whiplash walk into a dealership that week, and you could feel the confusion. On one side of town, Indian salesmen were grinning like they'd been handed a golden ticket. On the other, Harley reps stood in silence, watching customers wander across the street for test rides. It wasn't arrogance or anger, it was disbelief. For years, Harley dealerships had been used to being the destination. Now, they were the alternative. One dealer in Arizona admitted it straight. The moment riders saw that price, they didn't even blink. They wanted a test ride, not a debate. Another from Michigan said he'd never seen that kind of traffic since the early 2000s boom. Trade-ins were stacking up. Road Kings, Ultras, and older Road Glides, all from owners curious about what Indian had pulled off. The riding experience sealed it. Expecting a budget bagger, riders found balance, smooth acceleration, firm braking, better cornering, qualities once reserved for Harley's top tier. Forums filled with posts of switches and dual ownership, brand betrayal fading to practicality. Harley dealers reacted with quiet, discounts and extended warranties, but it was too late. The tide had turned. What began as a pricing stunt became a cultural tremor, shaking loyalty itself and proving that performance, not pedigree, now ruled the American road. And when the dust began to settle, one thing stood undeniable: the numbers. Because no matter how smooth the spin, math always tells the truth. Numbers that don't lie. Within the first 60 days of launch, Indian's registrations jumped by a record-breaking 32% nationwide. Some regions reported triple-digit gains. Industry trackers confirmed what the forums had already guessed. Indian's new release was stealing customers directly from Harley's touring lineup. It wasn't speculation, it was measurable. Dealers across the Midwest and the South saw waiting lists stretch past 6 months. Road Glide sales, once a benchmark of dominance, slipped nearly 12% in the same quarter. Those figures weren't catastrophic for Harley, but they were humiliating. The market had spoken clearly. Performance per dollar now mattered more than heritage alone. Independent reviewers confirmed the data. Indian's torque curve stayed flat and strong through the mid-range, its aluminum frame delivering sharper steering and long-haul comfort. Resale trends told the same story. Few Indians for sale, while used Harley prices dipped for the first time in a decade. Riders who once bragged about gold-like value grew quiet. By quarter's end, one truth stood firm: the $13,000 Indian wasn't a stunt. It was a wake-up call Harley could no longer ignore. And as the industry analysts finished crunching the data, one question began echoing louder than the rest: how were riders themselves processing this shift? because behind every sales chart and factory line stood the people who lived these machines, and their reaction would define what came next. Dealers at a crossroads walk into any dealership in the spring after Indian's release, and you could feel two different worlds. On one side of town, Indian showrooms hummed like Saturday swap meets. Coffee brewing, salesmen talking fast, riders crowding around the demo bikes. The $13,000 bagger had turned what used to be quiet weekdays into full-blown events. One dealer in Tennessee said he sold through 2 months of inventory in a week. The smell of new leather and warm engines filled the air like optimism itself. Across the street, the scene was quieter. Harley dealerships that once pulsed with the confidence of legacy were now holding more conversations than closing deals. Chrome that used to dazzle sat untouched. Salesmen tried to sound upbeat, but there was an edge to their tone, a mix of pride and worry. They weren't just fighting competition, they were fighting time. Some shop owners adapted fast, offering trade-ins on new Indians or restoring used bikes to survive. Others doubled down on Harleys. Premium image with lounges, fittings, and live music, but many rural dealers couldn't keep up and quietly closed by summer's end. This downturn wasn't just financial, it was emotional. After decades as Harley's evangelists, dealers now faced riders asking harder questions. Loyalty had limits, and for many, the road ahead no longer followed the familiar map of the past. Yet outside the dealership walls, another kind of crossroads was forming. Not in boardrooms or showrooms, but in the hearts of riders who had sworn they'd never ride anything else. The loyalists who crossed the line. Every revolution has its quiet turncoats. Among riders, crossing from Harley to Indian felt almost like a confession. Some did it in secret, keeping their new purchase tucked behind the garage, afraid of catching grief from old riding buddies. Others were open about it, posting pictures of their new bike online with captions that started with, "Never thought I'd say this." Jim Dalton, a 68-year-old veteran from Missouri, rode Harley since 1978 until one test ride on the new Indian changed everything. It wasn't about the badge, he said, it was about the ride. Across the country, others echoed that shift. Comfort over pride, value over memory. Selling a Road Glide felt like betrayal, yet peace replaced guilt. Rising fuel, insurance, and living costs made riders practical again. The American dream on two wheels now meant longevity, not blind loyalty. And where there's a change in loyalty, there's always a ripple in creativity, because the people who build and modify these bikes were watching too. If you believe riders deserve truth over marketing, subscribe now. Every week we dig into the real stories the industry hides, because out here, honesty still rides louder than hype. Custom culture in a tug-of-war. Every revolution eventually hits the garage. Within months of the new Indian's success, aftermarket suppliers began flooding the market with fresh parts. Taller windshields, custom pipes, hand-stitched seats, and LED retrofits. Independent builders who once only worked on Harleys suddenly had Indian frames on their lifts. Some saw opportunity, others saw blasphemy. At the annual rally in Sturgis, debates broke out louder than the exhaust pipes. One builder said the new bike had no soul yet, claiming that a Harley's personality was born in decades of grease, not price tags. Another countered, "Soul's what you build into it, brother." The argument summed up the state of American custom culture, torn between honoring the past and embracing what actually works. In Florida and Texas, shops began blending brands, offering parts for both Harley and Indian alike. Painters revived classic Harley colorways on Indian tanks, sparking curiosity. Younger riders embraced the mix. Older ones folded their arms but watched. Customization, America's rebellion against conformity, roared back stronger than ever. As more Indians rolled out, the aftermarket exploded. Builders found the bikes easy to modify, riders loved the freedom, and suddenly it wasn't about logos, it was about building machines that truly fit their lives. But even as garages evolved, a deeper question began to haunt the conversation. What happens when heritage, the backbone of biker identity, stops being enough to define loyalty? Heritage versus reality. Every brand, every rider, every shop had to confront one truth. Nostalgia can't outrun reality forever. For decades, Harley-Davidson's name had meant freedom, rebellion, and craftsmanship. But freedom costs money, and rebellion doesn't always pay the bills. The new Indian exposed a fracture that had been forming quietly under the surface. Riders loved the story of Harley, but they were tired of paying for it twice. In parking lots and gas stations, old friends stood over bikes once bonded by brotherhood but now divided by meaning. Some felt betrayed, others felt free. Heritage mattered, but so did honesty, and Harley had stopped listening while Indian quietly built. Riders began realizing identity lived in the miles, not the logo. As that truth spread, respect returned. Harley and Indian riders nodded again, united by one lesson. The road doesn't care what you ride, only that you keep riding. But the road ahead still held more twists. Because while riders were finding peace, the industry itself was still shifting gears towards something even bigger. A full-scale transformation that would reshape American motorcycling from the factory floor to the halls of power. Retooling the Titans. In the months that followed Indian's $13,000 disruption, both companies went back to their factories, not just to build more bikes, but to rebuild their identities. Inside Indian's Spirit Lake plant, engineers worked longer hours, refining assembly lines that were already running near capacity. The goal was precision at scale, to maintain quality while proving they could meet the surge in demand without losing the personal touch. Workers described the atmosphere as electric, a rare mix of pride and pressure. Everyone understood that they were no longer the underdog, they were the standard. Across the Midwest, Harley-Davidson's plants pulsed with urgency as management analyzed every department to cut waste without losing the brand's soul. Executives walked factory floors again, listening to welders and test riders, a long overdue return to hands-on leadership. The design mindset shifted too. Less chrome, more craftsmanship. Lighter frames, adjustable ergonomics, and improved suspension signaled humility-driven innovation. For the first time in years, Harley wasn't just defending tradition, it was rediscovering the engineering grit that built its legacy. In the end, both factories found something valuable in the chaos. Renewal. Competition, for all its tension, reignited the creative fire that built American motorcycling in the first place. But on the horizon, another force was forming, not from factories, but from Capitol Hill. The policy ride-along. When motorcycles start showing up in political speeches, it usually means someone in Washington smells opportunity. By the following year, lawmakers were already framing the Harley-Indian rivalry as proof that American manufacturing was alive again. Committees began citing the success of Indian's pricing model as a case study in domestic competitiveness. Senators from Iowa and Wisconsin called for renewed incentives for companies that kept production local. Labor unions quickly entered the debate. The United Steelworkers, representing Harley employees, demanded assurance that automation wouldn't replace workers, while Indian's expanding workforce became the new Made in America symbol, earning political favor once Harley's alone. Tariff talks reignited as lawmakers clashed over imported parts, some praising Indian's balanced model of global sourcing and domestic pride, others warning that reliance on foreign vendors risked future shocks. The discussion proved motorcycles were now at the center of America's industrial identity. As hearings continued, one message rang clear. Motorcycles were no longer just lifestyle products. They were symbols of industrial identity. Harley and Indian were now examples in economic policy papers, not just ads in glossy magazines. But politics never stop at the border. While Washington argued over tariffs and subsidies, the world beyond America's shores was watching and reacting. The global ripple abroad, the news of Indian's market breakthrough spread faster than a viral race clip. European outlets framed it as the American Renaissance, calling it the first time in decades that two U.S. brands were battling seriously over engineering and price instead of nostalgia. In the United Kingdom, where the bagger scene had always been smaller, reviewers marveled at the concept of a full-size touring machine priced under the equivalent of £10,000 sterling. In Japan, analysts were less sentimental and more strategic. They viewed Indian's move as a masterclass in efficiency, a domestic company applying the same manufacturing discipline that Japanese firms pioneered in the 1980s. Yamaha and Honda insiders reportedly began discussing whether similar pricing pressure could reach the Asian touring segment, where American imports had traditionally been considered luxury items. In Europe, Harley's image of exclusivity began to crack as journalists compared cost to performance and called it an overpriced relic. Investors noticed, downgrading Harley while boosting Polaris to outperform. Yet not every review favored Indian. Critics questioned whether rapid scaling could dilute the craftsmanship behind its rise. Still, even skepticism came with respect because, for the first time in a generation, American motorcycle returned to global headlines for the right reasons: performance, value, and the revival of real competition on two wheels. Yet while the world studied numbers and balance sheets, one group still cared more about the road than the market: the riders themselves. And for them, the real forecast wasn't about stock prices or politics. It was about what these changes meant for life behind the handlebars. The rider's forecast. 5 years from that first shockwave, the landscape of American touring will look different: leaner, smarter, and more honest. Harley will still stand tall, but not untouched. The Road Glide will likely evolve into a lighter, more rider-focused version, built to remind loyalists why they fell in love in the first place. Expect refined suspension, better seat ergonomics, and price points that no longer require second mortgages. Indian, meanwhile, will expand its lineup but tread carefully, balancing affordability with heritage to avoid diluting what made their victory authentic. For riders, the changes mean real choices. The brand monopoly is over, giving touring bikers machines that fit wallets and backs alike. Lower resale peaks make long-haul riding more accessible, while parts and service now follow demand, not logos. Pride has shifted back to craft, cam profiles, clutch feel, and balance over branding. Indian's $13,000 gamble and Harley's humbled response reignited America's motorcycle soul, proving competition, not nostalgia, keeps the open road alive for those who still ride it. So as the sun dips over a two-lane highway and the sound of twin cylinders echoes through another long ride, the message is simple. It's never been about the name on the tank. It's about the miles ahead, the metal beneath you, and the grit it takes to keep riding forward. That's the real forecast, and it looks strong. If this story hit you like it hit us, smash that like button, drop a comment below, and tell us where you stand: Team Harley or Team Indian. And if you want more deep dives into the truth the bike industry won't tell you, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next ride.